My parents sold their house of 30 years and handed every dollar, $720,000, to my brother as a wedding gift. I barely had time to process that betrayal before the next one hit. When I refused to evict my tenants so they could stay with me for a while, they showed up at the property with suitcases, pounding on the door like they already owned the place. That was the moment I realized they weren't just crossing a boundary. They were invading my life. And what I did next left them stunned in a way they never saw coming. I should probably start by telling you who I was before everything snapped. My name is Alara Whitkim, and for the last 8 years I've built a small but thriving interior design and custom furniture studio out of sheer stubbornness and sawdust. Most days you'd find me in a linen shirt, jeans, and my worn leather apron, hair tied back, sanding down walnut boards while the workshop heater hummed in the corner. It's the kind of life people underestimate until they see what these hands can make. And maybe that's always been my story. Underestimated until pushed too far. I grew up in a house where the rules were unspoken but sharp. Kalen, the only son, was the investment. I, the daughter, was expected to be understanding. I heard that word my entire childhood. Be understanding when Kalen's summer camp costs more than your entire school year. Be understanding when your brother needs help with college. But you can figure it out. So I figured it out. 3 part-time jobs at once, eating dollar ramen, stitching together a degree I paid for myself. Meanwhile, Kalen's tuition was wired straight from our parents' account the moment it was due. My mother used to say it with a smile, like it was a compliment. Girls just don't need as much help, sweetie. You're stronger. At the time, I didn't realize she meant it literally. Less help. More burden. If you were always called the strong one in your family, when did you realize that label came with a price? As an adult, I kept my distance. Not because I didn't love them, but because I could breathe better when I wasn't being squeezed into the role of the forever responsible child. Then I married Rowan, the first person who truly saw me, not the version of me shaped by guilt or obligation, but the woman who fought her way into a craft she loved. We bought a cozy home in Briarstone Heights and started talking about building a family of our own. Quiet mornings with coffee on the porch, late-night conversations about the family we hoped to build. The soft kind of future I'd worked years to earn, entirely on my own terms, without a single dollar of help from anyone. What none of us knew back then is that the same family who once told me I was strong enough to need nothing would, years later, try to take something from me they had no right to touch. And the way I finally stopped them would change our family for good. By my late 20s, I'd built Whitkim Design Studio from a single rented workbench in a shared warehouse space into a small team of 4, taking on custom furniture commissions and full home interior projects across the region. It wasn't glamorous at first. I slept some nights on a cot in the back of that warehouse when a big commission deadline loomed. I taught myself joinery from library books and second-hand tutorials because I couldn't afford formal training. Every skill I have, I built with my own 2 hands, one splinter at a time. Kalen, meanwhile, had a very different trajectory. Our parents co-signed his first business loan, a boutique consulting firm that folded within 18 months. They quietly absorbed the loss. When he tried again with a different venture, they helped again. This was never framed as favoritism in our house. It was framed as helping the one who needs it more, a phrase I heard so often growing up that I stopped noticing how it always, without exception, pointed in the same direction. I want to pause here, because I think a lot of you watching this recognize this pattern in your own families, maybe not with money, but with attention, with grace, with second chances. The daughter who's so capable gets less help precisely because of how capable she's become. It's a strange kind of punishment disguised as a compliment. Rowan and I built a life that felt, for the first time, entirely mine. In addition to running the studio, I'd quietly invested in 2 small rental properties over the years, modest duplexes, nothing extravagant, but a retirement plan I built brick by brick while everyone around me assumed I was just doing the furniture thing. My tenants, an elderly couple named the Faradays who'd lived in one unit for 6 years, and a young family of 4 in the other, were the kind of renters landlords dream about. Reliable, kind, respectful of the property. I tell you about the Faradays and the young family because they matter enormously to what happened next. 18 months ago, my parents sold the house I grew up in, the house where I'd once been told I was too strong to need help, for just over $720,000 after 30 years of ownership and appreciation. I found out about the sale itself secondhand, through an aunt, almost 2 months after it closed. My parents hadn't thought to mention it to me directly. What I learned next explained the silence completely. Every dollar of that sale, the full $720,000, had been transferred to Kalen as what my mother called, in the family group chat, a wedding gift to help him and Priya start their life right. I read that message 3 times before it fully landed. Not a portion. Not a loan to be split evenly someday. The entire proceeds from my childhood home, handed to my brother in a single transfer, while I had built every square foot of my own life without a cent of that same generosity. I called my mother that evening, and I asked, as calmly as I could manage, whether there had been any plan to share any portion of that money with me. There was a long pause on the line. Then she said, "Alara, you've never needed help. You've always figured things out." There it was again. That same phrase from my childhood, dressed up in adult clothing, still doing the same job it had always done, excusing an imbalance that had shaped my entire life. After the wedding gift phone call, I didn't hear from my parents for almost a month. I assumed, wrongly, that some space might lead to a real conversation eventually. Instead, I got a different kind of call entirely, this time from my mother, asking if my rental property, the duplex where the Faradays lived, had any openings, because she and my father were considering downsizing further after giving Kalen the house proceeds and needed somewhere affordable to land. I explained gently that both units were occupied by long-term tenants I had no intention of displacing, especially not the Faradays, who were in their late 70s and had nowhere else lined up. My mother's response chilled me. "Family comes first, Alara. Surely you can figure something out for us. You always do." I said no. Clearly, calmly, and for maybe the first time in my adult life, without following it up with an apology or a scramble to soften the blow. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, Rowan and I pulled into the driveway of the duplex to drop off replacement filters for the Faradays unit, and found my parents standing on the porch. Suitcases beside them. My father was mid-conversation with Mr. Faraday, gesturing at the unit like he was already measuring furniture placement. My mother turned to me with a bright, expectant smile, as though she were arriving for a pleasant visit rather than an ambush. "We decided to just come and sort it out in person," she said. "It'll be easier once we're actually here." Mr. Faraday looked at me with quiet confusion, clearly uncertain what exactly was unfolding on his own front porch. That look, the disruption of an elderly man's peace of mind because my parents had decided their comfort simply mattered more than his, is the moment something inside me went completely, finally still. I told my parents, in front of Mr. Faraday, in front of Rowan, that they needed to leave the property immediately, that this was not their home, and that showing up uninvited to pressure an elderly tenant out of his residence was not a family matter, it was a legal one, and I would treat it as such if it happened again. My mother's face shifted from confusion to something closer to disbelief. "After everything we've done for this family," she started, and I felt the old script rising in my chest, the one that always ended with me apologizing for having limits. I didn't let it finish. "You gave Kalen $720,000 and didn't think to tell me the house had even sold," I said. "I am not doing this on someone else's front porch." My parents left that day, though not gracefully. There were phone calls over the following weeks, some from my mother trying to reframe the moment as me overreacting, some from my father insisting I was punishing them for a decision that had nothing to do with me. Kalen, to his credit, eventually called on his own and admitted, quietly, that he'd known the full amount before the transfer happened and hadn't said anything, because, in his words, it was easier not to. I sat with that admission for a long time. Easier not to. That phrase, more than anything else in this entire story, explained 30 years of my life. What happened over the following months surprised even me. I didn't cut my parents off completely. Rowan and I talked at length about what boundaries without total severance could look like, especially with our first child on the way. But I stopped absorbing the old role entirely. I stopped being the daughter who figured it out, so everyone else's needs could come first. I told my parents, clearly, that any future relationship required actual acknowledgement of the pattern, not just uncomfortable silence followed by pretending nothing happened. It took nearly a year, but my mother eventually did something I never expected. She sent a letter, an actual handwritten letter, not a text buried in a group chat, apologizing specifically for the phrase, "You don't need help," and admitting she'd used it for decades as a convenient excuse rather than acknowledging what it actually meant for me growing up. It wasn't $720,000. It never will be. But it was honest, and after 30 years, honesty mattered more than I expected it to. Today, my daughter, Marisol, is 7 months old. She spends most weekends in my workshop in a little padded corner, watching me sand walnut and oak while Rowan handles client calls in the next room. I've decided, with total certainty, that she will never hear the words, "You're so strong, you don't need help," used as an excuse for anything. Strength, in this house, will always come with support attached, not instead of it. My parents visit sometimes now, on terms I set, in a relationship that looks nothing like the one I grew up inside. It's smaller. Quieter. But it's honest, which is more than I had for the first 30 years of my life. If you've ever been called the strong one when what you really needed was support, tell me in the comments. I want to know how many of us were taught to confuse strength with silence. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way through. If it moved you even a little, it would mean the world to me if you hit that subscribe button and turned on notifications, because we share stories just like this one every single week, real, honest, and told with care.